Part 6. The Grand March. 1. Not until 1980 were we able to read in the Sunday Times how Stalin's son Yakov died. Captured by the Germans during the Second World War, he was placed in a camp together with a group of British officers. They shared a latrine. Stalin's son habitually left a foul mess. The British officers resented having their latrine smeared with shit, even if it was the shit of the son of the most powerful man in the world. They brought the matter to his attention. He took offense. They brought it to his attention again and again and tried to make him clean the latrine. He raged, argued, and fought. Finally, he demanded a hearing with the camp commander. He wanted the commander to act as arbiter. But the arrogant German refused to talk about shit. Stalin's son could not stand the humiliation. Crying out to heaven in the most terrifying of Russian curses, he took a running jump into the electrified barbed wire fence that surrounded the camp. He hit the target. His body, which would never again make a mess of the Britishers' latrine, was pinned to the wire. 2. Stalin's son had a hard time of it. All evidence points to the conclusion that his father killed the woman by whom he had the boy. Young Stalin was therefore both the son of God, because his father was revered like God, and his cast-off. People feared him twofold. He could injure them by both his wrath — he was, after all, Stalin's son — and his favor. His father might punish his cast-off son's friends in order to punish him. Rejection and privilege, happiness and woe, no one felt more concretely than Yakov how interchangeable opposites are, how short the step from one pole of human existence to the other. Then, at the very outset of the war, he fell prisoner to the Germans and other prisoners belonging to an incomprehensible, standoffish nation that had always been intrinsically repulsive to him, accused him of being dirty. Was he who bore on his shoulders a drama of the highest order, as fallen angel and son of God, to undergo judgment not for something sublime in the realm of God and the angels, but for shit? Were the very highest of drama and the very lowest so vertiginously close? Vertiginously close? Can proximity cause vertigo? It can. When the North Pole comes so close as to touch the South Pole, the earth disappears and man finds himself in a void that makes his head spin and beckons him to fall. If rejection and privilege are one and the same, if there's no difference between the sublime and the paltry, if the Son of God can undergo judgment for shit, then human existence loses its dimensions and becomes unbearably light. When Stalin's son ran up to the electrified wire and hurled his body at it, the fence was like the pan of a scales sticking pitifully up in the air, lifted by the infinite lightness of a world that has lost its dimensions. Stalin's son laid down his life for shit. But a death for shit is not a senseless death. The Germans who sacrificed their lives to expand their country's territory to the east, the Russians who died to extend their country's power to the west, yes, they died for something idiotic, and their deaths have no meaning or general validity. Amid the general idiocy of the war, the death of Stalin's son stands out as the sole metaphysical death. 3. When I was small and would leaf through the Old Testament retold for children and illustrated in engravings by Gustave Doré, I saw the Lord God standing on a cloud. He was an old man with eyes, nose, and a long beard, and I would say to myself that if he had a mouth, he had to eat, and if he ate, he had intestines. But that thought always gave me a fright. because even though I come from a family that was not particularly religious, I felt the idea of a divine intestine to be sacrilegious. Spontaneously, without any theological training, I, a child, grasped the incompatibility of God and shit, and thus came to question the basic thesis of Christian anthropology, namely that man was created in God's image. Either slash or. Either man was created in God's image and God has intestines, or God lacks intestines and man is not like him. The ancient agnostics felt as I did at the age of 5. In the 2nd century, the great Gnostic master Valentinus resolved the damnable dilemma by claiming that Jesus ate and drank, but did not defecate. Shit is a more onerous theological problem than is evil. Since God gave man freedom, we can, if need be, accept the idea that he is not responsible for man's crimes. The responsibility for shit, however, rests entirely with him, the creator of man. 4. In the 4th century, Saint Jerome completely rejected the notion that Adam and Eve had sexual intercourse in paradise. On the other hand, Johannes Iscarius Erigena, the great 19th century theologian, accepted the idea. He believed, moreover, that Adam's virile member could be made to rise like an arm or a leg when, as its owner wished. We must not dismiss this fancy as the recurrent dream of a man obsessed with the threat of impotence. Erigena's idea has a different meaning. If it were possible to raise the penis by means of a simple command, then sexual excitement would have no place in the world. The penis would rise not because we are excited, but because we order it to do so. What the great theologian found incompatible with paradise was not sexual intercourse and the attendant pleasure. What he found incompatible with paradise was excitement. Bear in mind, there was pleasure in paradise, but no excitement. Erigena's argument holds the key to a theological justification. In other words, a theodicy of shit. As long as man was allowed to remain in paradise, either, like Valentinus's Jesus, he did not defecate at all, or, as would seem more likely, he did not look upon shit as something repellent. Not until after God expelled man from paradise did he make him feel disgust. Man began to hide what shamed him, and by the time he removed the veil, he was blinded by a great light. Thus, immediately after his introduction to disgust, he was introduced to excitement. Without shit, in both the literal and the figurative senses of the word, there would be no sexual love as we know it, accompanied by pounding hearts and blinded senses. In part 3 of this novel, I told the tale of Sabina standing half naked with a bowler hat on her head and the fully dressed Tomasz at her side. There is something I failed to mention at the time. While she was looking at herself in the mirror, excited by her self-denigration, she had a fantasy of Tomasz seating her on the toilet in her bowler hat and watching her void her bowels. Suddenly her heart began to pound, and on the verge of fainting, she pulled Tomasz down to the rug and immediately let out an orgasmic shout. 5. The dispute between those who believe that the world was created by God and those who think it came into being of its own accord deals with phenomena that go beyond our reason and experience. Much more real is the line separating those who doubt being as it is granted to man, no matter how or by whom, from those who accept it without reservation. Behind all the European faiths, religious and political, we find the first chapter of Genesis, which tells us that the world was created properly, that human existence is good, and that we are therefore entitled to multiply. Let us call this basic faith a categorical agreement with being. The fact that until recently the word shit appeared in print as S has nothing to do with moral considerations. You can't claim that shit is immoral after all. The objection to shit is a metaphysical one. The daily defecation session is daily proof of the unacceptability of creation. Either slash or. Either shit is acceptable, in which case don't lock yourself in the bathroom, or we are created in an unacceptable manner. It follows then that the aesthetic ideal of the categorical agreement with being is a world in which shit is denied and everyone acts as though it did not exist. This aesthetic ideal is called kitsch. Kitsch is a German word born in the middle of the sentimental 19th century, and from German it entered all Western languages. Repeated use, however, has obliterated its original metaphysical meaning. Kitsch is the absolute denial of shit in which both the literal and the figurative senses of the word. Kitsch excludes everything from its purview, which is essentially unacceptable in human existence. 6. Sabina's initial inner revolt against communism was aesthetic rather than ethical in character. What repelled her was not nearly so much the ugliness of the communist world, ruined castles transformed into cowsheds, as the mask of beauty it tried to wear. In other words, communist kitsch, the model of communist kitsch is the ceremony called May Day. She had seen May Day parades during the time when people were still enthusiastic or still did their best to feign enthusiasm. The women all wore red, white, and blue blouses, and the public, looking on from balconies and windows, could make out the various five-pointed stars, hearts, and letters when the marchers went into formation. Small brass bands accompanied the individual groups, keeping everyone in step. As a group approached their viewing stand, even the most blasé faces would beam with dazzling smiles, as if trying to prove they were properly joyful, or, to be more precise, in proper agreement. Nor were they merely expressing political agreement with communism. No, theirs was an agreement with being as such. The May Day ceremony drew its inspiration from the deep well of the categorical agreement with being. The unwritten, unsung motto of the parade was not "Long live communism," but "Long live life." The power and cunning of communist politics lay in the fact that it appropriated this slogan. For it was this idiotic tautology, "Long live life," which attracted people indifferent to the thesis of communism to the communist parade. Seven. 10 years later, by which time she was living in America, a friend of some friends, an American senator, took Sabina for a drive in his gigantic car, his 4 children bouncing up and down in the back. The senator stopped the car in front of a stadium with an artificial skating rink, and the children jumped out and started running along the large expanse of grass surrounding it. Sitting behind the wheel and gazing dreamily after the 4 little bounding figures, he said to Sabina, "Just look at them." And describing a circle with his arm, a circle that was meant to take in stadium, grass, and children, he added, "Now that's what I call happiness." Behind his words, there was more than joy at seeing children run and grass grow. There was a deep understanding of the plight of a refugee from a communist country, where the senator was convinced no grass grew or children ran. At that moment, an image of the senator standing on a reviewing stand in a Prague square flashed through Sabina's mind. The smile on his face was the smile communist statesmen beamed from the height of their reviewing stand to the identically smiling citizens in the parade below. 8. How did the senator know that children meant happiness? Could he see into their souls? What if the moment they were out of sight, 3 of them jumped to the 4th and began beating him up? The senator had only one argument in his favor, his feeling. When the heart speaks, the mind finds it indecent to object. In the realm of kitsch, the dictatorship of the heart reigns supreme. The feeling induced by kitsch must be a kind the multitudes can share. Kitsch may not, therefore, depend on an unusual situation. It must derive from the basic images people have engraved in their memories: the ungrateful daughter, the neglected father, children running on the grass, the motherland betrayed, first love. Kitsch causes 2 tears to flow in quick succession. The first tear says, "How nice to see children running on the grass." The second tear says, "How nice to be moved, together with all mankind, by children running on the grass." It is the second tear that makes kitsch kitsch. The brotherhood of man on earth will be possible only on a basis of kitsch. 9. And no one knows this better than politicians. Whenever a camera is in the offing, they immediately run to the nearest child, lift it in the air, kiss it on the cheek. Kitsch is the aesthetic ideal of all politicians and all political parties and movements. Those of us who live in a society where various political tendencies exist side by side and competing influences cancel or limit one another can manage more or less to escape the kitsch inquisition. The individual can preserve his individuality, the artist can create unusual works, but whenever a single political movement corners power, we find ourselves in the realm of totalitarian kitsch. When I say totalitarian, what I mean is that everything that infringes on kitsch must be banished for life. Every display of individualism, because a deviation from the collective is a spit in the eye of the smiling brotherhood. Every doubt, because anyone who starts doubting details will end by doubting life itself. All irony, because in the realm of kitsch everything must be taken quite seriously. And the mother who abandons her family, or the man who prefers men to women, thereby calling into question the holy decree, "Be fruitful and multiply." In this light, we can regard the gulag as a septic tank used by totalitarian kitsch to dispose of its refuse. 10. The decade immediately following the Second World War was a time of the most horrible Stalinist terror. It was the time when Teresa's father was arrested on some piddling charge and 10-year-old Teresa was thrown out of their flat. It was also the time when 20-year-old Sabina was studying at the Academy of Fine Arts. There, her professor of Marxism expounded on the following theory of socialist art. Soviet society had made such progress that the basic conflict was no longer between good and evil, but between good and better. So shit, that is, whatever is essentially unacceptable, could exist only on the other side. In America, for instance. And only from there, from the outside, as something alien. A spy, for instance. Could it penetrate the world of good and better? And in fact, Soviet films, which flooded the cinemas of all communist countries in the cruelest of times, were saturated with incredible innocence and chastity. The greatest conflict that could occur between 2 Russians was a lover's misunderstanding. He thought she no longer loved him, she thought he no longer loved her, but in the final scene they would fall into each other's arms, tears of happiness trickling down their cheeks. The current conventional interpretation of these films is this: that they showed the communist ideal, whereas communist reality was worse. Sabina always rebelled against that interpretation. Whenever she imagined the world of Soviet kitsch becoming a reality, she felt a shiver run down her back. She would unhesitatingly prefer life in a real communist regime with all its persecution and meat queues. Life in the real communist world was still livable. In the world of the communist ideal made real, in that world of grinning idiots, she would have nothing to say. She would die of horror within a week. The feeling of Soviet kitsch evoked in Sabina strikes me as very much like the horror Teresa experienced in her dream of being marched around a swimming pool with a group of naked women and forced to sing cheerful songs with them, while corpses floated just below the surface of the pool. Teresa could not address a single question, a single word to any of the women. The only response she would have got was the next stanza of the current song. She could not even give any of them a secret wink. They would immediately have pointed her out to the man standing in the basket above the pool, and he would have shot her dead. Teresa's dream reveals the true function of kitsch. Kitsch is a folding screen set up to curtain off death. 11. In the realm of totalitarian kitsch, all answers are given in advance and preclude any questions. It follows, then, that the true opponent of totalitarian kitsch is the person who asks questions. A question is like a knife that slices through the stage backdrop and gives us a look at what lies hidden behind it. In fact, that was exactly how Sabina had explained the meaning of her paintings to Teresa. On the surface, an unintelligible lie; underneath, the unintelligible truth showing through. But the people who struggle against what we call totalitarian regimes cannot function with queries and doubts. They too need certainties and simple truths to make the multitudes understand, to provoke collective tears. Sabina had once had an exhibition that was organized by a political organization in Germany. When she picked up the catalog, the first thing she saw was a picture of herself with a drawing of barbed wire superimposed on it. Inside, she found a biography that read like the life of a saint or martyr. She had suffered, struggled against injustice, been forced to abandon her bleeding homeland, yet was carrying on the struggle. Her paintings are a struggle for happiness, was the final sentence. She protested, but they did not understand her. Do you mean that modern art isn't persecuted under communism? My enemy is kitsch, not communism, she replied, infuriated. From that time on, she began to insert mystifications into her biography, and by the time she got to America, she even managed to hide the fact that she was Czech. It was all merely a desperate attempt to escape the kitsch that people wanted to make of her life.